you will hear throughout this talk, there's basically not enough scientists to really understand how breath and brain interact, but there's enough to make some really intriguing educated guesses. So that's what we'll be talking about. So one of the reasons that breathing techniques started to really interest me, both personally and as a neuroscientist, is that when you really look into it, it turns out that conscious breathing can have a huge impact on your state of mind. And by now, some of these things have kind of penetrated into mainstream consciousness, let's say. So for example, a lot of people are aware of the fact that conscious breathing can, for example, reduce your stress, reduce perceived pain, anxiety, and promote subjective well-being. But other effects of breathing are still a lot less well known. So for example, the fact that it can upgrade your immune system, that it can heighten or profoundly change your sensory experiences, reactivate inherent physical abilities that you haven't used for many decades. It can help you to recall forgotten memories and allow you to experience or re-experience really powerful emotions and insights. And it also can enable you to have visions. So the reason I call this visions and not hallucinations is because it's not something where you believe what you're seeing or what you're hearing is real. You don't believe that it's happening right now. It feels more like a non-verbal form of cognition. So you are actually seeing and hearing things, but you treat them as ideas in your head. So that's why they're not hallucinations, but they are true sensory experiences, and they can be quite powerful. So that's actually, to the sort of Western scientific mindset, that would be quite surprising. That's some really, really powerful effects of breathing. So that seems like quite a new discovery. But actually, when you look at cultures across the world, it really kind of isn't. So some of these effects have been used in different cultures for centuries, sometimes for millennia. So just to give you like a little bit of a flavor of the things that have been going on across the world. So some of the things that we also in the West know a little bit better already are techniques like Zen and Qigong that help you to be more in harmony with your body, with your own kind of thoughts. Then generally breathing techniques have a lot of different incarnations across Asia, which is really cool. So in India alone, there are so many different techniques, some of which are summarized in the so-called pranayama, which is kind of a sequence of 7, 8, 9 breathing techniques that can either help you to calm down, to fix specific physical ailments, or to just feel more energetic also. The same goes for Tibet. Tibet has a lot of different breathing techniques. One of the really interesting ones that we'll also get back to later is Tumo, which is sometimes also called fire breath. So the way this works is that monks go out into like the really cold mountains, put a wet blanket over themselves, and then breathe really intensely for an hour or two. And the goal, so if you've mastered this technique, the goal is that by the end of that time, your own body heat should have dried the blanket. So that's clearly some really strong sort of physical energy. Then also a lot of indigenous cultures across the world are actually using different breathing techniques in spiritual and sacred contexts. So Aborigines in Australia do circular breathing. Well, you also need that to play the didgeridoo, but it's also a thing in itself. Then in different areas, actually there's different forms of throat chanting, which means that you breathe in really deep, and then you do this really deep chanting that basically splits your voice in two almost, because it's so deep. So it's a very controlled, very intense but slow breath. Then one thing that I never realized before is that actually the typical greeting of Hawaii, aloha, means sacred breath. And so this is a really big thing in Hawaiian culture, and actually elders of a community will do different breathing techniques to strengthen their decisiveness, to strengthen their physical well-being, and so on. And then across Native American communities, there's also a lot of different breathing techniques that help you to do different things. Some of them are used to basically heighten your senses. For example, if you have to hunt at night, find water, seeing, which means that you intuitively find, for example, the location of a certain type of plant or whatever. Accumulating energy, so accumulating strength for difficult tasks like having to run for a few hours on end and so on. But interestingly, also to let go of past experiences or trauma consciously. So there's specific breathing techniques for that in Native American culture. In Africa, you have something that seems to more address family traumas. So I found this really interesting as well. So what you do is you breathe until you feel that your ancestors are breathing through you, and then you let them breathe for you and speak for you. So this seems to be a really interesting form of basically what we would call psychotherapy today. Now, seeing this map, a really interesting question about this is, of course, what's up with Europe? Why does Europe seem to be such a blank space here? My personal theory of this is that basically in Europe, the shamanic practices have been wiped out so strongly by Christianity, and obviously that also goes for North America, that basically we don't seem to have any written accounts or traditions that have survived that. That's my personal theory, but of course it could just be that in Europe people just never discovered breathing techniques. Right, so this seems to be pretty pervasive, and some of these claims sound sometimes a little bit like, well, is this really true, or is this just kind of placebo, what's happening here? So let's look at how this might actually work. Why might breath have such a profound effect on our body and on our brain? And let's start just with a very simple relation between normal breathing and brain. So nothing specific, no specific techniques, just the in and out breath that we're doing right now. And even just that seems to modulate brain activity really, really fundamentally. So it synchronizes neuronal activity across very widespread brain areas and across oscillatory frequencies. And it starts with the olfactory bulb, which makes sense. This is not a surprising bit yet. So because of course the olfactory bulb processes smells, so it would make sense that it kind of synchronizes with your breathing. What's really fun to watch here is that when you look at this, so you have the curves here that show a little bit faster breathing during expiration and slower breathing during rest. And the local field potentials all the way at the top do seem to match up to that, so that's nice. But what's even more fun is that when you look at the high frequency aspects of these local field potentials, actually the high frequency bursts seem to really match really well with the breathing. So you basically have high frequency oscillatory bursts on top of every breath. And when you're looking at exploration, these high frequency bursts are more in the sort of 80-90 hertz range, whereas during rest, the bursts that really line up well with the breathing are around 50 hertz. So there's also a shift in frequency depending on what the animal or the person is doing. So as I said, this is really fun, but it's olfactory bulb, so it's not crazy surprising. But this actually goes on over large areas of the brain. So here's a study that looked at how different areas line up to the breath. So somatosensory cortex, motor cortex, visual cortex, and hippocampus. And you have a normalized intensity of the field potentials here over lots and lots of different instances of breathing, and you see these little waves here. So what this really means is that the local field potential waves line up directly to the breath. And again, during rest, these waves seem to be a bit slower, and during exploration, they seem to be a bit faster. And here's a study that used a slightly different technique to quantify this, but they basically found the same finding. And in this case, for orbitofrontal cortex, where you see that all the local field potential peaks are lined up to a specific phase of the breathing cycle. So that's already really interesting. There's a lot of synchronization going on just based on normal breath. So how can this be harnessed by different conscious breathing techniques? I'll talk a little bit about the mechanisms behind 3 different breathing techniques that I think are quite nicely complementary. So first of all, slow breathing techniques or meditation, which are mainly thought to help you to connect to your emotions in a sort of calm way and find balance and harmony. And then the Wim Hof Method, which is mainly thought to improve your health and your immune system and your physical strength. And then holotropic or connective breathing, which is mainly used to connect to emotions and memories and to process trauma. Now, all of these breathing techniques have overlapping effects. It depends on who is breathing, it depends on what type of session, on what your life phase is. So all of these can have similar effects as well, but these are kind of the main things that people report. So let's have a look at what's happening. First of all, let's look at meditation or slow breathing techniques, which are clearly the best research at this point. So 10, 20 years ago, people started really looking into this in a neuroscientific way, so we have the most evidence for what's going on for this breathing technique. So in this case, I'm summarizing everything that requires you to do a slow, controlled breathing rhythm and focus on internal sensations. So there can be quite a few different techniques. techniques, but we're summarizing them here. And generally what people find is that when they start meditating in this way, at first it seems quite effortful, so you kind of have to get your mind back to the present all the time, so you have to work on that quite hard. But at some point, as you get more experienced, what you're really kind of looking to find is this moment of what you would call effortless being. So you're just being in this moment, and you're breathing, and it's all you're doing. And as I said, the main effects that people generally find is that you can focus your attention better, it relaxes you, it helps you to regulate your emotions, and also to reduce pain perception. So, what happens while you meditate? You can see this in two ways. First of all, you can look at the brain areas that get engaged, and it seems that there's basically kind of a circular activation of different networks in the brain, which corresponds to different phases of meditation. So let's say you start with focusing on your breath, then at some point your mind starts to wander. So MW is mind wandering, then you become aware that your mind is wandering, and you say, okay, I'm shifting my focus back, and the cycle starts, right? And as you go through these different phases, different areas of your brain will get activated, and you can imagine that in experienced meditators, the mind wandering network would be kind of weakened, and the other networks will be strengthened. Then in terms of the brain dynamics that are happening across these areas, one of the main things that people have found is that actually the oscillatory signatures across the brain really get modulated by meditation. And I'm not going to go into the details of this because also these are just a couple of examples, but basically different brain areas really seem to shift both the power and frequency of the oscillatory signatures and also the balance between them. Right, so what happens when you do slow breath or meditation in the long term? How does this affect your brain to produce changes like being able to regulate your emotions better? Well, first of all, experienced meditators seem to show reduced activity in the default mode network and the thalamus, but increased activation and connectivity in areas of cognitive and emotional control, and also of introspection. So, for example, anterior and mid-cingulate cortex, or the frontal cortex and insula. They also have an increased cortical thickness, an increased antibody count, and a decreased heart rate variability. So their heart rate is just generally more steady. And this is a nice summary of the brain areas that seem to be most enhanced by meditation.
Excuse me, what does the default mode network mean?
Oh, so that's kind of the network that humans normally kind of idle through when you're not doing anything specific, right? So that usually that's active when we're not doing anything, right? So, and so that's reduced. Okay. Yeah. Okay, next breathing techniques. The next breathing technique is the Wim Hof Method, which is based both on the Tibetan Tummo technique that I talked about before, and also some aspects of the Indian pranayama traditions. As I said, pranayama is a summary of lots of different breathing techniques, but some of them relate to what Wim Hof developed. The way it works is actually quite simple. So you do 30 really intense, fast breaths, like this, and then you hold your breath as long as you can. And then you repeat that again, usually 3 times. Usually, this is also often accompanied with exposure to cold. So this is you might have seen videos of this. These are the people who kind of like swim in icy lakes. And Wim Hof himself actually went up Mount Everest in a t-shirt and that kind of thing. So the main effects that people notice is that they have an improved immune system and overall health, decreased inflammation, which also seems to help people, for example, with arthritis and rheumatitis, and sort of enhanced emotional stability to life challenges. Now the beautiful thing is that this actually got looked at quite systematically by scientists here at the Radboud University. And so they really wanted to know, okay, what's happening with this breath? Because the first hypothesis was basically that Wim Hof is like a freak of nature, right? He just has some weird genetic thing going on that makes him like not feel cold or whatever. And he really wanted to convince people that this is just all about the breath. So he actually trained 20 randomly chosen subjects in his breathing technique for a few weeks, and then they systematically looked at, okay, what's changing in the body that makes these people feel healthier. And so first of all, what happens while you're doing this breath? So this is a curve of the breathing at the very top. So you see that you're first breathing very, very fast, and then you're not breathing at all. And as this happens, your body experiences intermittent hyper and hyperoxygenation. So first of all, you have more oxygen usually, so you're at 100% actually, and then as you're holding your breath, your oxygenation goes down compared to what your normal oxygenation would be. And you see that the tolerance of the body for hypooxygenation actually gets bigger. So at the last cycle, you're actually at around 50% oxygenation before that person feels the need to breathe again. Together with this, you're also experiencing hyper and hypocapnia. So either very low CO2 while you're breathing strongly, because you're breathing out all the CO2, and then very high CO2 as you're holding your breath. And what this leads to is intermittent respiratory alkalosis. So what this means is when your CO2 levels get very low, your blood actually becomes more alkaline. So the normal pH of blood is around 7.4, but as you decrease your CO2, it goes to about 7.8. And we'll talk a bit more about what happens when you do this for a longer time later, because in the Wim Hof breath, this is just for a very short amount of time. So as a response to this, your body will emit cortisol during the breathing. This is only during the breathing, because as you'll see, actually after breathing, your cortisol levels are lower than those of normal people. So during the breathing, you release cortisol, and you also release a load of catecholamines, so epinephrine and also some norepinephrine, and activate the sympathetic nervous system. Now, as I said, one of the main claims of this method is that it improves immune response and health. So that's actually what the studies here at Radboud looked at first, which makes sense. And so the way they did that is to give people an immune challenge. So they basically injected some bits of E. coli bacteria, and usually what happens after you do that is a few hours later, people start having a fever and a headache for a bit. And so you can kind of see how the immune system responds. And in this extremely pixely plot, what you see is that the claims of this method are actually correct. So this is the general symptom score of people after this immune challenge, and you see that the lower curve is that of people who practice the Wim Hof method, and so they have a lot less symptoms. Now, how does this actually happen? Well, the first thing that seems to happen is that as soon as this immune challenge starts, experienced breath practitioners increase their output of epinephrine and norepinephrine. So that's what you can see here. But at the same time, the cortisol response to this immune challenge is actually suppressed compared to normal people. And as a result of this, what happens is that the balance of cytokines in your blood changes. So the anti-inflammatory response gets bigger and the inflammatory response gets smaller, which might also explain why, for example, people with arthritis and so on, and also with autoimmune disease really profit from this. Right. Final breathing technique, connective or holotropic breathwork, which is also sometimes called rebirthing. This was developed independently by Stan Grof and Leonard Orr in the 60s and 70s. And a really funny story for this is that so Stan Grof was doing a lot of LSD research. And then at some point, LSD obviously wasn't legal anymore. And so he started looking for ways to achieve a similar mind state, but without having to use any substances. And so that's how he kind of came upon this breathwork approach. And the way it works is actually quite simple. So you do a really long, deep in-breath, but in a fast, relaxed out-breath. And importantly, you don't do any pauses in breathing, which is actually what you see, for example, in babies. Babies just breathe all the time, and then grown-ups tend to kind of stop breathing a lot more. So that's all you're really doing. Interestingly, that can have a big effect. It doesn't always, every session is different, but some of the things that can be seen quite regularly is that you have resurfacing memories, you have altered or heightened sensory perception, reflexive physical movement, like your body feels like it wants to move in a certain way, visions as I said before, and also like eureka moments where you go like, oh, this, let's say, life problem or this thing I've been thinking about, this is the thing that I need to do about this. So that's what happens during a session. In the long run, some of the things that have been looked at, with psychological inquiries, with questionnaires, is that people seem to process and integrate trauma, that you see significant decreases in anxiety and depression, and also strong increases in well-being than with just talk-based or with music therapy. That physical experiences and abilities get recovered, so basically your relationship with your body seems to become a bit closer, a bit more easy, and also that people show increased self-awareness and authentic self-expression. Okay, how does this happen? Well, during the breathing, what seems to happen is that because you're breathing really, really deep and quite intensely, so you have hyperoxygenation, so increased O2, and hypocapnia, so lower CO2, and that leads to respiratory alkalosis, so alkaline blood. And in this case, because you're not holding your breath in between, like with the Wim Hof Method, this keeps going for, let's say, an hour, right? Now, because of that, what happens is that, first of all, this blood flow to your brain slows down, but that blood is highly, highly oxygenated. So you don't have like a lack of oxygen, but the blood flow slows down. And very interestingly, so this is not proven directly, but there's some very good indirect indication that what might happen is that you actually release endogenous DMT, because alkaline blood basically signals that you're kind of at a near-death stage. And it has been shown that, for example, with in rats, if you basically give them a heart attack, if they're just before dying, they do release DMT. So there's a pretty decent chance that you're releasing some endogenous DMT at this point. And so these processes lead to changes in the brain, specifically an attenuation of your frontal cortical activity, so basically metacognition, emotional and cognitive control get kind of dampened down a little bit, and also there's a very strong dynamic alteration of the oscillatory balance in different areas, and that actually depends on your experience, right? So every breathwork session is different. So for example, if someone's seeing visions, you'll have a completely different oscillatory signature than someone who's moving a lot or who's feeling very relaxed and so on. So there's not one oscillatory signature that you can say this is breathwork, but you do see clear changes in brain oscillations depending on what your experience is at this moment. Now, how do the changes, the long-term changes that we've talked about come about? Nobody really knows. No one has looked at long-term brain changes in people who do holotropic breathwork. The best we have is kind of a theory, which I think is a good theory, and it would be really nice to think about what the brain substrates would be of this. So basically, the idea would be that while you're doing breathwork, you're basically being exposed to feared internal affective stimuli, as Ryan and William say, but in the context of a supportive therapeutic setting. And so what happens is that you're extinguishing covert avoidance behaviors. And that seems to, that's experienced as catharsis, and it seems to work well on people who have strong cognitive control and therefore would maybe have an easy time accessing those things if they're just, for example, talking about them. So my best guess would be that you should probably, in people who do regular holotropic breathwork, you should probably see some changes in, for example, amygdala and frontal cortices, but this would be really fascinating to look at. Right, summary. Brain and breath are really intricately intertwined, and in terms of neuroscience, we've only just started understanding how it works. And so as you can see, breathing is really not just something you do all the time to keep yourself from turning blue, it's something you can use to change the way you interact with the world. So it's really worth using it, and it's also really worth studying it further. If you're interested in this, there's some resources. I just put them up for a sec. There's some books, there's some blogs, then there's some breathwork practices you can go to do more sessions. There's obviously also all the papers that I've mentioned in this talk, so if you're interested in the scientific literature, you can definitely come to us and ask for them. But basically the best way to understand this and to really start feeling what the processes might be is really to do it. So that's why the second part of this is practical. First of all, any questions? Yeah.
Is there any difference between breathing through your nose or through your mouth?
Yes, there is. There's a huge difference. And there's actually a slide that I almost put and then I didn't put it, so that's it. So nasal breathing does a lot more to synchronize your brain activity. And I think that makes sense because we used to use sniffing in order to understand the world, so the brain is really tuned to that. So nasal breathing seems to synchronize brain activity more. And so therefore it also helps you with things like, so you're better at memorizing on the in-breath. So for example, if you just show stimuli randomly and later ask people which ones they recall, they're more likely to be the ones that they saw while they were breathing in. And you're also better at, for example, understanding facial expressions during the in-breath. So there's some really funny cognitive things going on. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, then I think we can move to the practical part. If anyone feels uncomfortable with this, obviously they can come talk to us for a sec, or you can just have a nice coffee for a bit. But then we'll move over to the circle with the